But without further ado, we're now moving back from Tasmania, Melbourne, and London back towards Paris and Singapore. But first, Paris. And so we're joined now, and I'm going to ask my colleague Olivier to bring her on board onto the main screen. So we're joined by Karine Litu, who's the Global Head of Products and Solution Private Equity at BNP Paribas Securities Services. And of course, before joining BNP Paribas Securities Services, she worked for many years in one of Europe's largest, I guess, private equity investors. So she has a dual experience from both sides of the fence. And Karine's talk today will focus on, private equity capital markets, the recent trend that she has witnessed from her global perspective, about the rise of private equity and venture capital, and perhaps focusing more on her investment banking, custodian, security services role. But of course, she has a universal global perspective. So Karine, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Nicolas. So good morning, good evening, everybody. So it's true that when we were talking about private capital, we are really gathering the private equity with all the type of private equity, meaning some buyout, growth, venture fund, infrastructure, the real estate, and also the private debt. Private debt, it's also an area where we can see a strong growth in terms of investment. So in fact, it's another type of instrument in order to invest into companies, but it's really, I would say, non-listed investments. So clearly, asset under management, so for all the private capital asset classes, have reached another record in 2020 with around 8 billion of USD clearly invested into this asset class. We can see now a little bit slowdown, but nevertheless, the first quarter of 2021 has reached another record, which is 10% over the same period of 2020, with more than 200 billion of USD, which have been raised during this first quarter. What we can see also is that the COVID crisis has accelerated concentration. 10 largest private equity firms have raised more than 23% of the total fundraising. So clearly a large concentration in terms of fundraising. 70% of this capital raised are being cashed by buyout and growth equity funds. We expect that alternative by 2025 will account around 15% of the global asset management industry. As of today, it's around 13%, especially for private equity to cover more than 50% of the market. Clearly, diversification benefits of high income and risk-adjusted returns, drawing clearly institutional investors and especially pension funds to allocate more into private capital. In private equity, real estate remain really institutional privileged private equity asset classes, followed by natural resources and infrastructure. So we have seen that we can see large pension funds investing around 50% of their allocation into non-listed assets. The average clearly on the market, it's around 11%. Clearly, as of today, on average view for pension fund, with 8% in private equity and around 6% in private debt. So clearly, we can see that we have a very big, I would say, differences between the actors, clearly. If we look now at the impact of the COVID crisis, private capital clearly have really shown a very good resilience throughout the crisis with very few impact on valuations. So we have talked just before a little bit on the valuation of the non-listed and especially infrastructure. So it's true that it's a challenge into the market, but the market practice, it's really to have independent valuation included into the fund. So clearly these valuations are really not done by the management companies themselves, but really attested also by third party. And clearly, with COVID crisis, we have not really shown a strong impact on asset valuation. 45% of investors clearly plan to increase their allocation in 2021, and 39% plan to keep their investment at the same level. So clearly a strong trend in terms of allocation and to allocate more and more into private capital asset classes. What we can see is that 80% of investors plan especially to increase into private equity and 67% into private debt. So really focusing on, in fact, non-listed companies. This, of course, it's really linked to the COVID-19 crisis and the impact in terms of financing for all these companies. Private equity, venture fund, infrastructure clearly are really dominating the growth perspective also in terms of private capital ESG exposure for the next 2 to 3 years. And 47% of pension plan to increase their allocation into private equity and venture funds. So clearly, private capital is really a key actor to the economic recovery post-COVID crisis. Most governments in Europe, but also in the US, and I would say through the world, in fact, put the private capital sector into the center of the recovery plan, as most of the companies, of course, need financing, and which are non-listed companies. If we look really at pension funds, so clearly we can see that there is a strong allocation, especially into private equity, into private debt, into infrastructure, with a strong focus on ESG, of course, ESG focus in terms of investment strategy. But clearly, investing into private capital is not so easy at all. And this brings to a lot of challenges for the pension fund, like for all, I would say, institutional investors. Allocations so have increased a lot. Clearly, what we have discussed that, but clearly 5 years ago, we were more around 1, 2, or 5%. And clearly now what we can see is that some pension funds, other institutional investors have more than 20%, or some can reach really 50% of their allocation. But clearly, all this asset class, because it's non-listed company, no public data, no public information at all on these assets and on the funds in which the pension fund and also other institutional investors invest in, clearly meant to bring a lot of, in a way, challenges for the industry. It's very much paper-based, because when you invest into this kind of fund, you receive PDF reports, you receive PDF documents. So clearly it's not easy at all in terms of monitoring. And as of today, clearly there are not harmonized private capital terminology, but also templates in terms of communication by the different management company. And this brings a lot of, in a way, different key points for the institutional investors in order to monitor these investments. It's true that some, of course, some associations are trying to develop some templates, and we can see in the United States, the ELPA Association. So it's an association of institutional investors, and they have put in place some standard templates in terms of communication with the investors. Nevertheless, as of today, what we can see really into the market is that most of the management companies adapt these templates, because for them, it's also marketing documents when they communicate with their investors. And clearly, sometimes they are used, sometimes they are not. And clearly, this brings a lot of, in fact, manual workload, in fact, for the institutional investors in order to monitor this information and to monitor their investment, clearly. So as of today, clearly, there is a strong need for standardization on reporting on funds with also comparable performances indicators. We have discussed valuation. So clearly, valuation as of today, most of the funds have external advisors in order to validate valuation, and there are also in Europe some directives in order to have really, I would say, a true fair market value on the asset valuation. Nevertheless, after you need to I would say, to calculate the performances indicators for this non-listed, because on the listed, you have valuation each day. Clearly, you can adapt also your allocation depending, of course, on investor, on activity sector, geography, and you allocate depending on your, of course, on your strategy. For the non-listed, clearly, it's a buy and hold strategy. When you invest into this kind of funds, you are investing for 10 years, and into infrastructure, around 20 to 30 years. So clearly, you can't, in fact, reallocate to other asset classes at the same time. And in terms of performances indicators, clearly, this has also an impact. It's really specific performances indicators for this kind of asset class. But as of today, clearly, it's also another, I would say, need in terms of harmonization, in terms of, in order to be able really to compare the performances. So really, new challenges for the whole industry, automation, scalability, capacity to deal with complexity, clearly is something which is really critical. So as of today, what we can really see is that all institutional investors, but of course, clearly pension funds also, are putting a lot of pressure on the different asset management company in order to really to get quality data in a timely manner within platforms and really to comply with complexity at the same time. And clearly, many institutional investors really now are trying to find some outsourcing solution in terms to monitor this kind of asset class, because it brings really some, you need some specific tools and also competencies in terms of monitoring this complexity. And this trend has been reinforced due to the COVID-19 crisis, because all PDF documents, paperwork in a way, so many investors found that in-source operating model may not have proven resilient enough in extreme situations concerning scalability. And of course, working remotely has also been another challenge, as most processes for private capital didn't include automation or embedded workflow, as it could be for listed assets. So clearly, accessing data for investors is really something key, but the data itself is not sufficient. Quantitative analysis and genuine tools to support decision-making are becoming a must-have into the private capital market, because it's a buy and hold strategy, and you can't reallocate your allocation, I will say, on a real-time basis. So one of the major evolution also that we can see into the market is a growing digitalization on reporting tools, both for management companies, but also for investors, in order really to get access to the data. And clearly, ESG is a strong focus in terms of data, clearly as of today. All institutional investors need really this information in order to align their ESG investment strategy with, of course, the investment strategy of the underlying funds. And of course, there is no public data, always the same topic, no public data. And non-listed companies are not obliged as of today to publish, this ESG criteria information. So the management companies can report on ESG information, but as of today, it's not also something which is harmonized, clearly. So the first analysis that pension fund can do in order really to monitor that, it's really to have a look-through analysis. So not only at the fund itself, but really on all the underlying companies which are invested through the fund, in order to have a view on their allocation on a look-through basis by geography, by activity sector, in order to align also with the PRI principles in terms of geography and activity sectors. So clearly, also strong trend, we discussed about infrastructure funds, but clearly also really a strong trend with infrastructure funds with climate orientation. So clearly on this part, of course, ESG monitoring is easiest because it's the first focus for this kind of fund. Also venture fund, investing into technology transformation, innovative research against climate, clearly. So we can see that these funds are really much more oriented on the E, in fact, also in terms of investment strategy. For the S, clearly, it's much more focused on the real estate, especially with nursing homes, students' home, retirement homes, and so on. And so clearly, but the true monitoring with the three letters, with the E, the S, and the G, as of today, it's really something which need more harmonization and more standardization into the private capital industry.
Thank you, Karine. Thank you, Karine. And we received a few questions from our YouTube viewers and one on Zoom too. So let's start with the one here. So on average, how do asset owners invest into the asset classes? Is it mostly directly, indirectly, primary, secondary? I mean, how reliable are the statistics that we have?
So in fact, so as of today, what we can see is that most of asset owners invest through funds. So they take a commitment into funds which are managed by different management companies, which are in some very often specialized into the different asset classes. So we have discussed about Macquarie. Clearly, it's a really very brand name in terms of infrastructure. So clearly, asset owners take a commitment into infrastructure funds, which are monitored by Macquarie teams. Clearly, it's an example. In terms of direct investment, sometimes what we can see also is that some institutional investors negotiate with the management companies to have some co-investment rights and to be able to do some co-investment alongside the different management companies. But clearly, so the investment, it's done by the management company, but they have a right in order to do these settlements also on their side. In terms of pure direct, it's much more on the real estate, clearly, as of today that we can see direct investment. But private equity, venture, infrastructure, private debt, as of today, clearly, it's much more indirect in a way. So to take a commitment into funds which are monitored by, in a way, different specialists in terms of the different asset classes into private capital.
Okay, and one of the questions we received from our YouTube viewers is, and Olivier sent it to me, is the following: is you guys come from a listed securities business, right? So traditionally as custodians and investment bankers. So how difficult is it to move into these non-listed asset classes, which are typically, you know, more opaque or less transparent, or you have to really sometimes to fight to gather the data? And so in your personal opinion, you know, what would be a good regulatory or legal or cultural change that could happen across the private markets asset classes to help them, you know, become, you know, more transparent and have, you know, have more data available more regularly that you guys can then use and play with?
Okay, so in fact, so it's true that custodian is listed, but we have dedicated teams working on the private capital asset classes. And clearly it's not the same regulatory framework. In a way, for example, in Europe, there is in a fund, you need a depository. So you need a custodian, okay, on the fund. But it's not the same type of task. There is not the same regulatory obligations on the non-listed than on the listed, clearly. And so we have dedicated teams and dedicated tools in order to monitor the private capital asset classes. And in fact, as of today, we are working both for the management companies, so clearly as in a way as a custodian, but also mainly, I would say, our strong support to the management company. In a way, it's to do what we call middle office. So it's really to do fund administration for the fund in order to produce the reports, in order to provide some analysis and so on to the management companies, and also to produce what they need and to do all the, in a way, the financial, so with the accounting, with production of reports for investors and so on. So clearly we can do that as of today for the management companies, but we can also do some monitoring for the investors when they invest in order, in a way, to follow their commitment and to follow the code, the distribution that they receive from the different asset management companies. So clearly, into our teams, we're working a lot on data and especially digitalization in order to provide solutions for our clients, both management companies, but also institutional investors, with data in an harmonized way, in fact. So we take care in a way of that. And through digital portal, we can really give them access on more standardized information.
Great. And I think that Dr. Hu wanted to jump in from Singapore. And of course, you know, in the pre-COVID era, Guan Hu used to commute between, you know, Vancouver, Alberta, and Singapore. But because of the travel restrictions, it's becoming more difficult to commute between Canada and Singapore. But of course, he's a co-founder of the Singapore Economic Forum. He's also a scholar at Singapore's Management University. And amongst many roles, you know, he advises several sovereign wealth funds and PE tech funds in Asia. But he was also the head of risk management, or the head of enterprise risk at IAMCO, the large Canadian sovereign fund and public pension fund, earlier in life. So that gives him an APAC and Canadian perspective. And so I think in your days, when you were at IAMCO, your fund was one of the biggest in percentage terms, I think, one of the biggest private equity investors in North America in terms of a percentage allocated to private equity. And I think, you know, you guys were very active in the Silicon Valley back then. So with all your different hats, I guess you wanted to jump in regarding, you know, the way that you can assess your opinion on risk assessment and risk measurement, right, in private equity and venture capital. At any rate, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Nick. Merci beaucoup, Karine. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I would like to say good afternoon and good evening to all of you. With respect to private equity and venture capital, the thing is that in Canada and in Temasek as well, we were more direct. So we invested directly into the companies, or we invested jointly with other pension funds or things like that. And then Karine was nice enough to mention a lot of the challenges. Now, investing into infrastructure and venture is very different from investing in the public markets. In the public markets, you can talk about alpha and beta, but in the private world, it's all about proactive management. That means the alpha aspect, the stock selection. So your due diligence must be very, very important. And like what Karine has mentioned, COVID has brought about barriers to actually assess the assets in real time, or even to be on the ground. So last year, at the beginning of COVID, when travel was more liberal, actually a pension fund wanted to invest in an infrastructure fund in Singapore. So they hired an American advisory consulting firm, but they couldn't travel because they were based in California at that time. And they asked me to be their trusted advisor. So I became their proxy to actually visit the infrastructure fund in Singapore to assess for them. So the idea came to me that even during COVID, you have to think about different ways to do your qualitative due diligence. So the trusted partner approach could be one example. The other example is to use technology, as mentioned by Karine, but you could use even the avatar digital twin technology to actually have a remote proximity relationship, right? Using the 3D holography and things like that to have a picture of the infrastructure asset or the private equity company and things like that. So that is one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is that because you have to be more proactive in that sense, the danger is that COVID-19 has caused the corporate longevity of a lot of companies and funds to get shorter and shorter. That means the bigger funds tend to survive through the pandemic. The smaller funds may dwindle or they may merge or consolidate. So what happens is when your management of your funds become larger and larger, it means that when you look at your investment, you look at it from a different perspective. But because if you want to move the portfolio returns meter, you actually have to invest substantially of the funds first. Since your holdings, your AUM is larger, it means that you have to invest based on a larger amount. Or the thing that you invest has the potential to generate an alpha that is exponential in returns. So if you look at that, what COVID has done is to actually make the appeal of unicorn type sustainable technologies even more attractive. You know, because when you do venture investing, it must be able to move your portfolio returns meter in a way. So actually, these are some of the challenges that we face today. And of course, with valuation, when you value an asset yearly or 3 yearly or 5 yearly, the danger is that you forget about the vintage. So the J-curve effect comes into the picture, especially for ESG. For instance, if you want to invest in a green airport or green infrastructure, you may need to clear the forest first. When you clear the forest, it is deforestation. So you are carbon positive. You are emitting too much carbon. So if you measure the performance of the asset after 1 year, actually, they may not be truly ESG positive. Maybe the J-curve impact will come about maybe 3 or 4 years later when the infrastructure has been built, it's running with renewable energy and things like that. So those are the challenges we face when we invest directly. The only advantage, of course, is the fees. We cut down on the fees. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I want to say that we're delighted, David Weeks, Nick Cherry, and I, to have a beautiful quote from Dr. Guanseng Hu in our article published 3 days ago. And I've included the link here. So unfortunately, those of us watching us on YouTube and hearing us, they cannot have the link, but I will ask Olivier to forward the link later today. But it's an article basically where that I just included it here. It's called Boardroom Revolution, and Dr. Guanseng Hu has a very beautiful Canadian-Singaporean metaphor about private equity and venture capital investment risk, and it's about the aurora borealis. So I encourage all of you to look up the article worldpensions.org/boardroom-revolution, including that very interesting take from Dr. Hu. Once again, Olivier is slicing and dicing each and every one of these sessions. So they'll be published as autonomous individual clips at the end of this month. And of course, we will also, with David Weeks and Nick Cherry, publish 5 or 6 articles from next week onward, summarizing what was said today. I want to thank Karine for her great talk and bringing her securities lending investment banking perspective onto the private markets